The video game industry has never been more profitable. The average studio is earning more money than it did 5 years ago. Record revenue, record sales. And yet, since 2022, the headcount went the other way. 45,000 people who made those games have lost their jobs. And the number is still climbing. Here is the number that should stop you. 1 in 3 developers in the United States, 1 in 3, has been laid off in the last 2 years. Many of them came from studios that were reporting record profits at the same time. So here is the twist. Xbox just cut its biggest round of jobs in the platform's history. Ubisoft's own studios are on strike. And a major mobile company told its staff its new hire was AI, not people, which raises the question this video answers. How did the richest industry in games fall into a hiring catastrophe? And what, exactly, is the industry not telling you about why? Because the answer is hiding in the most profitable line of your favorite publisher's balance sheet. Let's start with the money, because the money is the part nobody argues about. In 2025, people around the world spent more than $200 billion on games. 201.6 billion. To be exact, a brand new record, up about 9% on the year before. Mobile alone was 113 billion. Console added another 45. PC, another 44. Every major platform grew. So whatever else this is, it is not an industry in a recession. By the one number a shareholder actually watches. Revenue. Gaming has never been bigger. There is a second thing the record hides. A record total does not mean everybody is winning. Most of that 200 billion flows to a handful of enormous games and a handful of enormous companies. Mobile is the biggest slice by far, more than half of it, and it is dominated by a small number of titles that print money year after year. So the headline is true, and it is also a little hollow. The industry is richer than ever, and the riches are more concentrated than ever. Concentration is a word you should keep in your pocket, because it is going to matter later. And yet, since 2022, more than 45,000 of the people who make these games have lost their jobs. Not over a decade, not over a generation. In about 3 years. That is a whole city of developers, artists, writers, testers, and producers, gone from the industry that was posting those records. Picture a mid-sized company town. Everyone in it works in games. And over 3 years, the town empties out. That is the human size of the number the balance sheet does not print. Where does a number that big come from? Not from a headline, from a survey. Every year, the Game Developers Conference asks the people who actually build games how their year went. Thousands of professionals across the whole industry. In its 2026 report, the answer that came back was blunt. 1 in 3 developers in the United States said they had been laid off in the previous 2 years. Worldwide, more than 1 in 4. At the biggest studios, the AAA ones, 2/3 of the people surveyed said their own company had cut jobs in just the last 12 months. So read those two facts side by side. Record spending, record firing, the same 3 years. That is the paradox this whole video is about. It is not a rounding error. It is the story. When an industry loses money, layoffs make a grim kind of sense. That is not what happened here. The people were cut while the money was going up. Which means the usual explanation. The business is struggling, does not survive contact with the balance sheet. Something else is going on. To understand it, you have to stop thinking like a fan and start thinking like the person who signs the payroll. A company does not staff itself for the money it made last year. It staffs itself for the money it thinks it will make next year. For a few years, the whole industry believed next year would keep going up and to the right. Forever. That belief is the quiet engine under this entire story. And it is worth saying plainly. A lot of very smart, Very well-paid people looked at a temporary surge in demand and decided it was permanent. When it turned out not to be permanent, the people who paid for that mistake were not the ones who made it. Here is what the record revenue hides. Revenue is not the same as where the revenue comes from. The moment you look at where the money is actually coming from, the layoffs stop looking like a tragedy that happened to a healthy industry and start looking like a decision that a healthy industry made. Hold that thought. We will come back to it, and it will explain everything. First, we need to see how bad the cuts actually got. In 2025 and 2026, this stopped being a spreadsheet story. The people being cut stopped going quietly. Start with the biggest one, because it broke a record of its own. In July 2026, Microsoft cut about 4,800 jobs across the company, roughly 2% of its entire workforce. But the pain was not spread evenly. It landed on Xbox. Somewhere around 3,200 of those roles came out of the gaming division. Close to 1 in 5 people in it, and 4 studios were spun off or sold. Double Fine, Compulsion Games, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs. Microsoft's own gaming leadership called it the most significant restructure in Xbox's history. So with that, the company that spent tens of billions buying its way to the top of gaming just made the deepest gaming cut it has ever made, in the same stretch that the market set a revenue record. Here's the honesty this video owes you early. When Microsoft explained those cuts, it did not say artificial intelligence took those jobs. Its own messaging is that AI is not the reason those people were let go. We are going to talk about AI at length, and we are going to be careful about it. But the biggest single cut in the industry was not sold to the public as an AI story. Remember that when we get there. Then there is Ubisoft, and Ubisoft is where the workers pushed back. On the 30th of June, staff at Ubisoft's Barcelona studio walked out, and that walkout opened a strike that ran for about 3 weeks. Around 380 jobs were flagged as at risk. The company went through a major reorganization, restructured its production groups, and narrowed the slate of games it was willing to fund. If you're getting something out of this, subscribing helps me keep digging into stories like it. Now, back to the money. This is the part the revenue chart never shows you. Behind the record numbers, you had developers on a picket line, in one of the biggest publishers on Earth, saying out loud that something was broken. They were not alone in the numbers. Earlier in the year, Epic, the company behind Fortnite and the engine half the industry builds on, cut more than 1,000 people, around a quarter of its staff. This was not new in 2026. It was a wave that had been building for years. In 2023 alone, more than 10,000 game developers lost their jobs. The list of companies doing the cutting is not a list of failures. It is a list of the biggest names in the business. Microsoft, Sony, Electronic Arts, Take-Two, Riot, Embracer. These are the winners. These are the companies posting the records. And they were all shedding people at the same time. Embracer is worth pausing on, because it is the whole pattern compressed into one company. It went on an enormous buying spree while money was cheap, snapping up studio after studio. Then the money got expensive. One huge deal fell through, and the group had to reverse course hard, cutting thousands of jobs and shedding studios it had only just bought. It bought during the boom and paid for it during the bust. And the developers inside those studios never got a say in either decision. Company after company, the same shape. Buy, expand, overhire, then cut. And there is a second order effect nobody advertises. Every time a studio closes or gets absorbed, the industry gets a little more concentrated, a little more owned by a little fewer people. That word again, concentration. So who are these people? Really, they are not executives. The executive who greenlit the overexpansion usually keeps their job. and often keeps the bonus that was tied to the deal that caused the problem. The people cut are the ones 3 and 4 levels down. The animator who spent 4 years on a game that got cancelled in a reorganization. The QA tester on a rolling contract that simply did not get renewed. The narrative designer whose whole team was folded into a live service project they were never hired for. When you read 1 in 3 US developers, that is who it is. And a lot of them came from studios that, on paper, were doing fine. And this is where the human cost compounds. Because game development is not a job you can pick back up anywhere. These are specialists. A senior engine programmer or a technical artist may have spent 15 years building a skill that only a few dozen companies on Earth even hire for. When those companies all cut at once, there is no next studio down the road. Because the studio down the road just cut too. That is why the survey number bites so hard. It is not one bad company having a bad year. It is the whole industry contracting in the same direction, at the same time, and leaving skilled people with nowhere obvious to go. Which brings us back to the question we parked. If the money is at a record, and the companies are not going bankrupt, why fire the people who make the thing the money comes from? To answer that honestly, we have to go back a few years, to the last time this industry felt unstoppable. Here is the turn. The layoffs of 2024. 5 and 6 were not really decided in 2024. 5 and 6. They were decided in 2020 and 2021. Think back to the early pandemic. Everybody was stuck at home, and a lot of them started playing games and spending on games all at once. Revenue shot up. The industry did what any industry does when demand spikes. It assumed the spike was the new normal. Analysts who study this now describe it plainly. Cheap borrowing, a pandemic bubble, and a spending spree. Publishers hired aggressively. Investors poured money in. The biggest players, Microsoft, Sony, and that Embracer Group, spent lavishly buying up studios. Everyone built their staffing and their budgets for a level of growth that was really a once-in-a-lifetime event. Not a trend. There's a second half to that boom, and it is about money being cheap. For years, borrowing was almost free, and when borrowing is free, investors go looking for anything that grows. And gaming was growing fastest of all. So money flooded in, valuations went up, and every publisher was rewarded for spending big and hiring big and buying big. Then, in 2022, that flipped. Borrowing got expensive again, almost overnight. Suddenly, the same investors who had cheered the spending started asking a different question. Not how fast are you growing? How much are you making? And how lean can you get? The whole industry got the same memo from its owners at the same time. Stop growing at all costs. Start cutting. Then people went back outside. The extra demand cooled back toward normal. And the industry was left carrying pandemic-sized teams and pandemic-sized budgets on top of after-pandemic revenue. That gap, between the size they built for and the size the market actually wanted, is where 45,000 jobs went. The layoffs are the correction. The overhiring was the mistake. And the workers paid for a decision made in a boardroom during a boom. You should ask the obvious question here. How did an entire industry full of clever people convince itself that a pandemic was a permanent business plan? The honest answer is that booms feel like the truth while you are inside them. Every quarter the numbers went up. Every rival was expanding. And the person who stood up in the meeting and said this is temporary. We should not hire for this. That person looked timid and got overruled. That is not a gaming problem. It is a human problem, and it shows up in every bubble ever recorded. The difference is that in games, the correction had a face. 45,000 of them. That is the structural story, and it is the honest one. Cheap money, a bubbles, overexpansion, then a bust. It is not glamorous, and it does not have a villain. And it is most of the picture. But it is not all of the picture. Layered on top of that correction is something newer. And this is the part the industry is genuinely uncomfortable talking about. Artificial intelligence. Let's be precise, because this is where bad videos overclaim and lose your trust. The claim is not that AI has already replaced all the game developers. It has not. The honest claim is narrower, and it is this. AI is an accelerant. It gives a company that already wanted to cut a new reason to cut, and a new way to cut deeper. Here is the clearest example on the record. In January 2026, a mobile games company called Playtika cut about 500 jobs, roughly 15% of its workforce. Unlike Microsoft, Playtika did not hide the reason. It told its people it wanted to lean on more AI-dependent resources and rely less on sheer headcount. Read that back. Rely less on headcount. That is a company saying, on the record, that AI is part of why these specific people are no longer needed. Playtika is not an outlier in using the technology, only in admitting it so plainly. In that same game developers conference survey, more than a third of the industry, 36%, said they were already using AI in their work. Think about what that does to a team's size over time. If a tool can do the first draft of the concept art, or the placeholder dialogue, or the basic code, a studio does not need to announce a layoff to shrink. It just quietly hires 2 people instead of 5 for the next project, and the jobs disappear before they are ever posted. That is the accelerant working in the background, and it does not show up in any layoff tracker. Meanwhile, the storefronts, the places you actually buy games, are filling up with cheap AI-generated titles, what developers openly call AI slop, drowning the real work and making it harder for a small studio to ever get found. This is the part that hurts the little guy the most. For a long time, the promise of digital storefronts was that a tiny team could make something great and get discovered on merit. Now that same shelf is buried under an infinite tide of machine-made filler, and the human-made game has to fight its way up through the noise. The record revenue we opened with does not reach those developers. It is being made above them, while the ground they stood on gets more crowded. So here is the tension, and I am going to leave it as a tension, because that is the truth. Microsoft, the biggest cutter, says AI is not why. Playtika, a smaller one, says AI is part of why. Both statements are on the record, and both can be true, because they are describing different companies making different bets. What you should take from that is not a slogan. It is a direction of travel. AI did not start this fire, but it is very good at helping a cost-cutting industry cut a little more, a little faster, and feel modern while it does it. Which leaves one question we still have not answered. Underneath the boom and the bust and the AI, why is the money itself pushing companies to shed the very people who make the games? For that, we finally open the balance sheet. Back at the start, I said the answer was hiding in the most profitable line of your favorite publisher's balance sheet. Here it is. The money in gaming is not shared evenly across the things games do. The most profitable money, by a wide margin, is what the industry calls recurrent spending, and live services. In plain terms, that is the money you spend after you have already bought the game. Skins, battle passes, season passes, in-game currency, the endless small purchases inside a game that never really ends. Look at what that money now is. At Electronic Arts, live services made up about 71% of the company's revenue, and the company posted record bookings of roughly $8 billion. At Take-Two, the maker of Grand Theft Auto, recurrent consumer spending, that same after-purchase money, was 78% of everything the company booked in its last financial year. And it grew, while a lot of the headcount around it did not. Read those two numbers as an operator would. The majority of the money at the biggest publishers now comes not from selling you a new game, but but from a small number of games you already own, selling you things forever. That changes who a company needs. A live service hit does not need a fresh 300-person team every 4 years. It needs a smaller team to keep one game running, patched, and full of new things to buy. The huge, expensive, single-player team that spends 5 years building a brand new world. That is the riskiest, least predictable money in the business. And it is exactly the kind of team that gets cut first when a company decides to chase the recurring line instead. Now put that next to the word I told you to keep in your pockets. Concentration. Recurring money rewards the games that already have huge audiences, because those are the ones with enough players to sell to forever. So the money flows to a handful of giant live service games, and away from the long tail of everything else. The big get bigger, the safe bet gets safer, and the risky, original, expensive new thing, the kind of game that needs a big team and a long runway, becomes the first thing a cautious executive cancels. The layoffs and the sameness you may have noticed in what actually gets released. Those are the same coin. Both are what happens when an industry optimizes for the most profitable line instead of the most creative one. This is also why the acquisitions matter. When Microsoft spends tens of billions buying publishers, it is not buying people, it is buying those recurring revenue lines, the franchises that already have players spending inside them. And once you own the franchise, the specific humans who built it are, in cold balance sheet terms, a cost you can trim. That is not a cartoon villain decision. It is the completely rational output of a business model that has quietly decided the game matters more than the makers. So put it all together, because this is the whole video in 4 sentences. The industry overbuilt during a pandemic boom and had to correct. The correction fell on the workers, not the executives who caused it. AI arrived as an accelerant, giving the cut a cheaper, more modern edge. And underneath all of it, the money itself was quietly moving toward a model that needs fewer game makers and more things to sell inside fewer games. The layoffs are not happening despite the record revenue. In a real sense, they are happening because of where that revenue now comes from. If any of this feels familiar, it should, because games are not special. This is the same story this channel keeps finding in one industry after another. A profitable era, a wave of layoffs, and AI arriving right on cue as the thing everyone can point to instead of the boring truth underneath. Tech did it. Media did it. Now games. Every time, the pattern rhymes. The good years get used to justify permanent expansion. The correction arrives. The workers absorb it, and the business emerges leaner, more concentrated, and more comfortable running on fewer people. Games are just the clearest version yet, because the money and the pain are both so easy to see. When an industry this rich sheds this many people this fast, it is telling you something about where all of them are heading. Here is my honest read, and you can hold me to it. The next few years will not be a rebound to the old way. The premium, big team, buy it once game is not dead, but it is becoming the risky exception, not the safe default. The safe default is a live service machine run by a leaner team, sharpened by AI, aimed at the recurring line. If that is right, the job numbers do not fully recover even when revenue climbs, because revenue and headcount have been quietly decoupled. That is a claim you can check. Watch whether the next revenue record comes with more developers, or fewer. I think it comes with fewer. Here is the one practical takeaway. Whichever side of the screen you are on. If you make games, the durable skill is not just building the world. It is building the thing people come back to and spend inside. Because that is where the money, and the jobs that survive, are moving. If you play games, understand that the free to start, spend forever design you keep meeting is not an accident. And it is not going away. Because it is now the most profitable line in the whole business. The industry is not poor. It is just spending its record money on machines that need fewer of the people who used to make the magic. That is the paradox. Solved. Record revenue, record layoffs, same 3 years, one balance sheet. If this was useful, the next video in this series follows the same money into a different industry doing the exact same thing. And I would start there. Thanks for watching.